The attorney's voice cut through the mahogany-paneled office like a blade. To Marcus and Jessica Harrison, we leave the Harrison Hotel chain, all commercial properties, and the complete financial portfolio. My brother Marcus smirked from across the polished conference table, his designer suit catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then came the words that would change everything. And to our youngest daughter, Rebecca Harrison, we leave Sunset Mesa Ranch in Colorado. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A ranch. A dusty, forgotten piece of land that my family had mocked for decades. While my siblings inherited a hospitality empire worth hundreds of millions, I got what they called the family embarrassment. But they had no idea what they had just handed me. My name is Rebecca Harrison, and I've been the family disappointment for as long as I can remember. Growing up in the shadow of the Harrison Hotel dynasty wasn't just about living up to expectations. It was about surviving in a world where your worth was measured by your ability to charm wealthy guests, negotiate million-dollar deals, and maintain the pristine image that had built our family's reputation across the Southwest. My parents, William and Catherine Harrison, were hospitality royalty. They had transformed a single roadside motel in Phoenix into a chain of luxury resorts that attracted celebrities, politicians, and business moguls from around the world. The Harrison name was synonymous with elegance, sophistication, and most importantly, profit. Every hotel in our portfolio was a testament to their vision: gleaming marble lobbies, crystal chandeliers, and service so impeccable that guests would return year after year. But I was never built for that world. From the moment I could walk, it was clear that I marched to a different drummer. While my older brother Marcus was charming investors at company picnics, and my sister Jessica was memorizing wine pairings for hotel restaurants, I was outside, fascinated by the desert landscape that surrounded our Phoenix estate. I collected rocks, studied the way cacti adapted to harsh conditions, and spent hours watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Rebecca, come inside," my mother would call from the terrace, her voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. "The Pemberton family is here, and they're considering investing in our new Sedona property. You need to make a good impression." I'd reluctantly trudge inside, my hands still dirty from examining some fascinating mineral formation, and attempt to make small talk with people who spoke only in terms of market shares and profit margins. Inevitably, I'd say something about sustainable tourism or environmental impact, and the conversation would grow awkward. My parents would exchange those looks, the ones that said they were wondering where they went wrong. Marcus, 3 years older than me, was everything they wanted in an heir. He had inherited our father's sharp business instincts and our mother's social grace. By the time he was 16, he was already accompanying Dad to board meetings, learning the intricacies of hotel management and real estate development. He understood that success meant creating experiences that wealthy people would pay premium prices for, and he was naturally gifted at it. Jessica, just 2 years older than me, was the perfect complement to Marcus. She had an eye for luxury and an intuitive understanding of what made people feel special. She could walk into any Harrison property and immediately spot what needed improvement, whether it was the thread count on the sheets, the arrangement of flowers in the lobby, or the training of the concierge staff. She was being groomed to handle the creative and operational sides of the business. And then there was me. I loved the outdoors with a passion that my family found baffling. While they saw the Arizona desert as something to be conquered and developed, I saw it as something to be understood and protected. I studied geology in my spare time not because I had to, but because I was genuinely fascinated by the way the Earth had formed over millions of years. I could spend hours reading about mineral formations, water systems, and the delicate balance of desert ecosystems. "It's just a phase," my mother would tell her friends at charity luncheons. "She'll grow out of it once she realizes how important the family business is." But it wasn't a phase. As I grew older, my passion for the natural world only intensified. I chose to study environmental science at Arizona State University, much to my parents' horror. They had expected me to major in business or hospitality management, to follow the path that had been laid out for me since birth. "Environmental science?" my father had said when I announced my decision. "Rebecca, that's not a career, that's a hobby. How is that going to help you run hotels?" The assumption that I would eventually run hotels was always there, lurking beneath every conversation, every family dinner, every business trip I was forced to accompany them on. They couldn't understand that I didn't want to run hotels. I wanted to find ways to make human activity more sustainable, to help businesses operate in harmony with the natural world rather than at its expense. During college, I threw myself into my studies with the same intensity that Marcus applied to learning about occupancy rates and revenue management. I studied renewable energy systems, sustainable agriculture, and environmental policy. I wrote papers on how the tourism industry could reduce its carbon footprint and still remain profitable. I genuinely believed that there was a way to bridge the gap between business success and environmental responsibility. My professors were impressed. Dr. Sarah Chen, my environmental chemistry professor, once told me that I had a rare ability to see connections that others missed. "You think systemically, Rebecca?" she said. "You understand that everything is connected. The soil, the water, the air, the economy. That's a gift." But my family didn't see it as a gift. They saw it as stubbornness, as a refusal to accept my responsibilities. The tension came to a head during my senior year. I had been accepted to a graduate program in environmental engineering at Stanford, and I was excited about the possibility of developing new technologies that could help solve some of the world's most pressing environmental challenges. When I told my parents about the opportunity, the reaction was swift and devastating. "Absolutely not," my father said, his voice cold and final. "You've had your fun with this environmental nonsense. It's time to grow up and take your place in the family business." "Dad, I'm good at this," I pleaded. "I'm really good at it. I could help the hotel chain become more sustainable. You could help by learning how to run a business," he interrupted. "Marcus is already handling acquisitions. Jessica is revolutionizing our guest experience programs. We need you to focus on operations management. The Tucson property needs a complete overhaul, and I want you to lead the project." It was a generous offer, objectively. The Tucson property was one of our largest, and being given the responsibility to manage its renovation would have been a dream opportunity for someone who actually wanted to be in the hotel business. But for me, it felt like a cage. "I don't want to run hotels," I said quietly. "I want to help solve environmental problems." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, and my father's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Not just disappointment, but genuine anger. "Then you're not the daughter I raised," he said finally. "If you can't see the value in what we've built, if you can't appreciate the opportunities we're offering you, then maybe you don't belong in this family." Those words cut deeper than any rejection I'd ever experienced. I had always known I was different, had always felt like I didn't quite fit the mold they had created for me. But to hear my father say that I didn't belong in the family, that was a wound that would take years to heal. I went to Stanford anyway. I took out student loans to pay for graduate school, worked part-time jobs to cover my living expenses, and threw myself into research that I hoped would make a difference in the world. My parents stopped returning my calls. Marcus and Jessica would occasionally send brief text messages, but it was clear they had been instructed to maintain minimal contact. I became the black sheep officially. For 3 years, I lived in a different world entirely. I worked with brilliant researchers who shared my passion for solving environmental challenges. I developed new methods for water purification, studied the potential of renewable energy systems, and learned about sustainable agriculture techniques that could feed growing populations without destroying the land. But I never stopped thinking about home. I never stopped missing the desert sunsets, the way the mountains looked in the early morning light, or even the complicated dynamics of my family. Despite everything, I loved them. I just couldn't be who they wanted me to be. When I graduated with my master's degree, I sent my parents an invitation to the ceremony. They didn't come. Marcus texted me congratulations, but Jessica didn't respond at all. I realized then that I had been truly cut off, that my choice to pursue my own path had cost me my family. I spent the next 5 years building a career in environmental consulting, working with companies that wanted to reduce their environmental impact while maintaining profitability. I was good at it, better than good actually. I had a reputation for finding innovative solutions to complex problems, and my client list grew steadily. But I never stopped being the Harrison family's black sheep. At industry events, people would occasionally recognize my name and ask about the hotel chain. I'd explain that I worked in environmental consulting now, and they'd look confused, as if they couldn't understand why someone would walk away from such a successful family business. It just wasn't for me, I'd say, which was true but also inadequate. How could I explain that I needed to find my own way, that I couldn't live my life according to someone else's blueprint, even if that blueprint promised wealth and success? The irony was that my work in environmental consulting had actually given me insights that could have helped the family business. I had learned about sustainable tourism practices, energy-efficient building systems, and waste reduction strategies that could have saved the Harrison hotels millions of dollars, while also reducing their environmental impact. But the bridge between my world and theirs had been burned long ago. When the call came about my parents' accident, I was in Denver, working on a project to help a mining company reduce water pollution in mountain streams. It was Jessica who called, her voice strained and unfamiliar. "Rebecca, there's been an accident," she said without preamble. "Mom and Dad, they were flying back from the Las Vegas property, and there was a storm. The plane went down." The world stopped. Despite all the years of estrangement, despite all the harsh words and cold silences, they were still my parents. The thought that they were gone, that there would never be another chance to bridge the gap between us, was devastating. I flew back to Phoenix immediately. The funeral was a massive affair, attended by hundreds of people from the hospitality industry, local politicians, and family friends I hadn't seen in years. Marcus and Jessica were gracious but distant, treating me like a family acquaintance rather than their sister. Standing at the graveside, listening to speaker after speaker talk about my parents' vision and legacy, I felt like a stranger in my own life. These people were mourning William and Catherine Harrison, the hotel magnates, but I was mourning the parents who had raised me, who had taught me to appreciate beautiful sunsets, and to always treat people with kindness, even if they hadn't understood my choices. It was only later, at the reading of the will, that I realized my parents had left me one final message. While Marcus and Jessica inherited the business empire they had always been destined to run, I inherited something that everyone else considered worthless: Sunset Mesa Ranch in Colorado. The ranch had been in our family for generations, but it had always been seen as a burden rather than an asset. My great-grandfather had bought it during the Great Depression, hoping to raise cattle and escape the economic uncertainty of the city. But the land was too remote, too difficult to develop, and too far from major markets to be profitable. My grandfather had held on to it out of sentimentality, and my parents had kept it only because they couldn't find a buyer. "I can't believe they stuck you with that white elephant," Marcus said after the attorney finished reading the will. "You know, Dad always said that place was a money pit." Jessica nodded sympathetically. "If you want to sell it, I'm sure we could help you find a buyer. It won't be worth much, but at least you'd get something." But as I held the deed to Sunset Mesa Ranch in my hands, I didn't feel disappointed. I felt curious. My parents had always been strategic in their thinking, even when it came to family dynamics. They wouldn't have left me the ranch just to get rid of it. There had to be a reason. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally understood that I needed to find my own way. Maybe this inheritance wasn't a consolation prize or a final insult. Maybe it was an opportunity. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom for the first time in years, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sell the ranch. I was going to Colorado to see what my parents had really left me. And maybe, if I was lucky, I'd finally understand what they had been trying to tell me all along. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive from Denver to Sunset Mesa Ranch took me through some of the most breathtaking landscape I'd ever seen. As my rental car climbed through the Rocky Mountain foothills, the urban sprawl gave way to rolling hills, dotted with pine trees and granite outcroppings. But despite the stunning scenery, my mind was churning with questions and doubts. What exactly was I doing? I had a successful consulting practice in Denver, clients who depended on me, and a life that I'd built entirely on my own terms. Yet here I was, chasing after a piece of property that my entire family considered worthless, driven by nothing more than a hunch and a desperate need to understand my parents' final message. The GPS guided me off the main highway onto increasingly narrow roads. First came the state route, then a county road, and finally a dirt track that seemed to lead into the middle of nowhere. The landscape began to change as I climbed higher into the mountains. The gentle hills gave way to more rugged terrain, with steep valleys carved by ancient glaciers and rocky peaks that scraped the sky. After 3 hours of driving, I finally saw it. A weathered wooden sign hanging from a rusty metal post. Sunset Mesa Ranch, Estate 1934. The paint was peeling, and one corner of the sign had been damaged, probably by weather or wildlife. It didn't look like much, but seeing my great-grandfather's name carved into the wood gave me an unexpected surge of emotion. The access road was in terrible condition, full of potholes and washouts from spring runoff. My rental car wasn't designed for this kind of terrain, and I had to drive slowly to avoid damaging the undercarriage. As I bumped and jolted along the track, I began to understand why my family had always considered this place a burden. It was incredibly remote, difficult to access, and clearly hadn't been maintained in years. The ranch buildings appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, and my first reaction was disappointment. The main house was a modest 2-story structure, built from local stone and weathered timber. It had probably been impressive in 1934, but decades of neglect had taken their toll. The roof sagged in places, several windows were boarded up, and the front porch looked like it might collapse at any moment. Scattered around the property were the remnants of what had once been a working ranch: a large barn with a partially collapsed roof, several smaller outbuildings in various states of decay, and the rusted remains of farm equipment that had been abandoned to the elements. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and debris, as if the mountains themselves were trying to reclaim the land. I parked near the house and stepped out of the car, immediately struck by the absolute silence. There were no car sounds, no urban hum, no signs of human activity for miles in any direction. The only sounds were the wind moving through the pine trees and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. But there was something else, something that made me pause and really look at the landscape around me. Despite the deteriorated buildings, despite the obvious abandonment, there was something magnificent about this place. The ranch sat in a natural bowl surrounded by peaks that rose like cathedral spires into the Colorado sky. A small creek meandered through the property, its water crystal clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. I walked slowly around the property, trying to imagine what my great-grandfather had seen when he first came here. The land had good drainage, natural windbreaks, and access to fresh water. For a cattle operation in the 1930s, it would have been ideal. But it was also incredibly isolated, which explained why it had never been commercially viable. The house key was exactly where the attorney had said it would be, hidden under a loose stone in the foundation. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty rooms, and I stepped inside to find myself in a time capsule. The furniture was still there, covered in dust sheets that had probably been in place for decades. The kitchen had an old cast-iron stove, a hand-pumped well, and cabinets stocked with canned goods that had expired years ago. The living room contained a massive stone fireplace, built-in bookshelves filled with volumes on ranching and animal husbandry, and family photographs dating back to the early days of the property. I found myself drawn to those photographs, studying the faces of relatives I'd never known. There was my great-grandfather, Henry Harrison, standing proudly in front of the barn when it was new. There were pictures of cattle drives, family gatherings, and seasonal celebrations that had taken place right here on this land. These people had built something here, had created a life that was meaningful to them even if it wasn't profitable. But it was the office that really caught my attention. Unlike the other rooms, which felt frozen in time, the office had clearly been used more recently. The desk was covered with papers and files, and the walls were decorated with geological survey maps and mineral rights documentation. This wasn't what I'd expected to find in a cattle ranch office. I began sorting through the papers, and what I found made my heart race. My great-grandfather hadn't just been a rancher. He'd been a prospector, constantly searching for valuable minerals on the property. The files contained decades of geological surveys, mineral assays, and correspondence with mining companies. Most of it was disappointing. Reports of trace amounts of common minerals, failed attempts to locate gold or silver deposits, and rejection letters from companies that had investigated the property. But there was one file that was different. It was labeled Lithium Survey, 1976, and contained a report from a geological consulting firm that had been hired to evaluate the property's mineral potential. The report was technical and dense, filled with chemical analysis charts and geological terminology that would have been meaningless to most people. Fortunately, my background in environmental science included enough geology to understand what I was reading, and what I was reading was extraordinary. The survey had identified significant lithium deposits in the rock formations beneath the ranch, but in 1976, lithium wasn't particularly valuable. It was used in some industrial applications and psychiatric medications, but there was no mass market for it. The consulting firm had concluded that while the deposits were substantial, they weren't economically viable to extract. But I knew something that the 1976 surveyors couldn't have known. Lithium had become one of the most valuable minerals in the world. The rise of electric vehicles, renewable energy storage, and portable electronics had created an enormous demand for lithium-ion batteries. Companies like Tesla were desperate to secure reliable sources of lithium, and the price had skyrocketed in recent years. I sat in that dusty office, reading and rereading the survey report, trying to fully grasp what I was looking at. If the 1976 survey was accurate, if the lithium deposits were as substantial as the report suggested, then this worthless ranch might actually be worth millions. But I needed to be sure. Geological surveys from the 1970s might not meet modern standards, and I needed current data to understand the true scope of what was buried beneath this land. I also needed to understand the legal implications. Did I actually own the mineral rights, or had they been sold separately at some point? I spent the rest of the afternoon digging through every file and document I could find. The mineral rights had indeed stayed with the property, passed down through the family along with the surface rights. My great-grandfather had been smart enough to retain control of everything below ground, even when he couldn't find anything valuable. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I stood on the front porch of the old house and tried to process everything I'd learned. This place that my family had always mocked, this ranch that had been seen as a burden and a failure, might actually be sitting on top of a fortune. But even if the lithium deposits were real, even if they were as valuable as I thought they might be, I still faced enormous challenges. Mining lithium would require massive capital investment, environmental permits, and technical expertise that I didn't have. It would also mean destroying the natural beauty that had drawn me to this place in the first place. I thought about my parents, about their lifetime of building and developing and creating wealth from nothing. They had always been strategic thinkers, always looking for opportunities that others missed. Had they known about the lithium, had they left me this ranch not as a consolation prize, but as a chance to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. As darkness fell and the stars emerged with a brilliance impossible to see in the city, I made my decision. I was going to find out exactly what was buried beneath Sunset Mesa Ranch. And if it turned out to be as valuable as I suspected, I was going to figure out how to extract it in a way that honored both my family's legacy and my own values. The black sheep of the Harrison family was about to become something nobody expected, a mining magnate with a conscience. But first, I had a lot of work to do. The first thing I did after returning to Denver was call Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a geologist I'd worked with on several environmental impact assessments. Amanda was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to read geological formations like other people read books. If anyone could help me understand what was really buried beneath Sunset Mesa Ranch, it was her. "Rebecca, it's good to hear from you," Amanda said when I reached her at Colorado State University. "I heard about your parents. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Amanda. Actually, that's partially why I'm calling. I've inherited some land, and I need a geological assessment. Are you available for a consulting project?" "Of course. What kind of property are we talking about?" I took a deep breath. "A ranch in the mountains, about 2,000 acres. I found some old survey reports from the 1970s that suggest there might be lithium deposits, but I need current analysis to know if it's worth pursuing." There was a pause. "Lithium? Rebecca, do you understand what you might be sitting on? The lithium market is absolutely exploding right now. Major auto manufacturers are signing billion-dollar supply contracts. If you've got confirmed deposits, that's exactly what I need to find out. Can you put together a team? I can do better than that. I'll bring my graduate students. They need the field experience, and this could be incredible for their research. When do you want to start? Within a week, Amanda and her team were at Sunset Mesa Ranch with ground-penetrating radar, core drilling equipment, and enough scientific instruments to outfit a small laboratory. Watching them work was like seeing the land through completely new eyes. They identified geological formations that I'd walked past without noticing, traced ancient water flows that had carved the valleys, and explained how the unique mineral composition of the area had created the perfect conditions for lithium accumulation. Your great-grandfather was smarter than he probably realized, Amanda told me as we watched her students take soil samples near the creek. He chose this location because it had good water access and natural windbreaks for cattle. But those same geological features that made it good for ranching also made it perfect for lithium concentration. The preliminary results were even better than I'd hoped. The 1976 survey had underestimated the scope of the deposits, probably because the technology wasn't sophisticated enough to detect lithium concentrations in deeper rock layers. Amanda's team estimated that the ranch could contain enough lithium to supply a major battery manufacturer for decades. But having lithium in the ground and being able to extract it profitably were two very different things. I needed to understand the business side of mining, the environmental regulations, and the massive capital requirements. Most importantly, I needed to figure out how to do it without destroying the pristine wilderness that had drawn me to the ranch in the first place. That's when I remembered Dr. Michael Chen, a professor of sustainable engineering at Colorado School of Mines. I had attended one of his lectures years earlier about environmentally responsible mining practices, and his research had stuck with me. If anyone could help me develop a lithium extraction process that minimized environmental damage, it would be him. Dr. Chen was intrigued by the challenge. Most lithium extraction is incredibly destructive, he explained during our first meeting. Traditional methods involve either strip mining or brine evaporation, both of which devastate local ecosystems. But there are emerging technologies that could change everything. He showed me research papers about selective lithium extraction using specialized membranes, minimal impact drilling techniques, and closed-loop processing systems that could recover lithium without contaminating groundwater or destroying surface vegetation. The technology was still experimental, but the potential was enormous. If we could prove these methods work on a commercial scale, he said, you wouldn't just be creating a profitable business, you'd be revolutionizing the entire industry. The idea excited me in a way that nothing had since my graduate school days. This wasn't just about getting rich. It was about proving that environmental responsibility and business success could go hand in hand. I could honor my family's legacy of building wealth while also staying true to my own values of protecting the natural world. But I still needed capital. Developing experimental extraction technology would require millions of dollars in research and development before we could even think about commercial production. I needed investors who would be willing to take risks on unproven technology, and I needed them to understand the long-term potential of what we were trying to create. I started with people I knew from the environmental consulting world. My first call was to Patricia Williams, a venture capitalist who specialized in clean technology investments. Patricia had made her fortune backing solar panel manufacturers and wind turbine companies in the early days of renewable energy. And she had a reputation for spotting opportunities before they became obvious. Sustainable lithium extraction, Patricia said when I pitched her the concept. Rebecca, if you can pull this off, you'll be printing money. The auto industry is desperate for reliable, ethical lithium sources. Tesla alone has committed to buying hundreds of thousands of tons over the next decade. Patricia introduced me to her network of investors, and within a month I had preliminary commitments for $50 million in funding. The money would come with conditions. We'd need to prove the technology worked, secure all necessary permits, and demonstrate that we could scale up to commercial production levels. But it was enough to get started. I also needed legal support. Mining law was incredibly complex, especially when it involved experimental extraction methods and environmental compliance. I hired Catherine Sullivan, one of Denver's top mining attorneys, to help me navigate the regulatory maze. The good news is that you own both the surface rights and the mineral rights, Catherine explained during our first meeting. That simplifies things considerably. The challenging part will be getting environmental permits for experimental extraction methods. The regulatory agencies don't have established procedures for approving technology that doesn't exist yet. Catherine's strategy was to work closely with the Colorado Department of Natural Resources from the beginning, involving them in the research and development process so they'd understand exactly what we were trying to accomplish. It was a risky approach. Most mining companies tried to reveal as little as possible to regulators, but it aligned with my commitment to transparency and environmental responsibility. While the legal and financial pieces were coming together, I was also dealing with a more personal challenge. My family's reaction to my new venture. Word had gotten out in the business community that Rebecca Harrison, the black sheep of the hotel family, was developing a mining operation. Marcus called me first. "Rebecca, what the hell are you doing?" he said without preamble. "I'm hearing rumors that you're starting some kind of mining company. Is that true?" "It's true. I'm developing sustainable lithium extraction technology." "Lithium? Rebecca, you're an environmental consultant. You don't know anything about mining." "I'm learning, and I'm working with people who do know about mining." There was a long pause. "Look, I know things have been difficult between us, but this sounds incredibly risky. If you need money, if you're struggling financially, we can work something out. You don't have to throw your life away on some crazy mining scheme." His condescending tone brought back all the old feelings of being dismissed and underestimated. "I'm not struggling, Marcus. I'm building something important. Something that could change the world. By digging holes in the ground? Rebecca, be realistic. You're not a businesswoman, you're a scientist. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't try to be something you're not." After I hung up, I sat in my Denver apartment, staring out at the mountains and thinking about my brother's words. Was I being realistic? Was I really capable of building a successful mining operation? Or was I just another dreamer who would crash and burn when confronted with the harsh realities of business? But then I thought about my parents, about the empire they'd built from nothing. They hadn't started with hotel experience either. They'd started with vision, determination, and the willingness to take risks. Maybe I was more like them than any of us had realized. The next morning, I drove back to Sunset Mesa Ranch with a notebook full of plans and a head full of dreams. Dr. Chen's team had begun setting up their experimental equipment, and Amanda's geological crew was preparing to drill their first test cores. The ranch was bustling with activity for the first time in decades. Standing on the front porch of my great-grandfather's house, watching scientists and engineers transform his failed cattle ranch into a cutting-edge research facility, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete certainty about my path forward. I was going to prove that the black sheep of the Harrison family could build something just as impressive as the hotels, something that would make them proud even if they couldn't understand it. And I was going to do it my way, with respect for the land and a commitment to making the world a better place. The real work was just beginning. 6 months after that first conversation with Dr. Chen, Sunset Mesa Ranch had been transformed into something that looked more like a high-tech research facility than a failed cattle operation. Modular laboratories had been installed in the renovated barn, and the old bunkhouse had been converted into living quarters for the rotating teams of scientists and engineers who were working around the clock to perfect our extraction process. The breakthrough came on a crisp October morning when I was reviewing financial projections in the old ranch house office. Dr. Chen burst through the door, his usually composed demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "Rebecca, we did it," he said, holding up a small vial of clear liquid. "The membrane separation system worked. We've successfully extracted lithium carbonate at 99.7% purity with zero groundwater contamination." I stared at the vial, hardly believing what I was seeing. This is it? This is actual lithium from our deposits? 50 grams of battery-grade lithium carbonate, extracted using a completely sustainable process. No strip mining, no toxic chemicals, no environmental destruction. We're about to change everything. The technical details were complex, but the basic principle was elegant. Dr. Chen's team had developed a system of specialized membranes that could selectively extract lithium ions from deep groundwater, similar to how reverse osmosis systems purified drinking water. The process used minimal energy, produced no toxic waste, and could be scaled up to industrial levels without disturbing the surface environment. Even more importantly, the extraction process was incredibly efficient. Traditional lithium mining recovered only about 30% of available lithium from ore. Our membrane system could recover over 90%, making even modest deposits extremely valuable. "What's the cost per ton?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Based on our pilot tests, we can produce lithium carbonate for about $3,000 per ton. Current market price is $25,000 per ton, and it's projected to stay above $20,000 for the next decade." The numbers were staggering. If we could scale up the process to produce just 1,000 tons per year, we'd be looking at annual revenues of $20 million with profit margins that would make any business owner envious. And Amanda's geological surveys suggested we could sustain that level of production for at least 50 years. But the real validation came when Patricia Williams brought a team of independent experts to evaluate our technology. The group included mining engineers, environmental scientists, and industry analysts who had seen every kind of extraction process imaginable. "I've never seen anything like this," said Dr. Robert Martinez, a mining engineer who had worked with major lithium producers in South America. "The environmental impact is essentially zero, the purity levels are exceptional, and the cost structure is revolutionary. If you can prove this works at commercial scale, you'll have companies lining up to license this technology." That comment sparked an idea that would transform our entire business model. Instead of just extracting lithium from Sunset Mesa Ranch, we could license our technology to other mining companies around the world. Every lithium deposit that was currently considered too environmentally sensitive to develop could potentially be brought online using our sustainable extraction methods. I spent the next week modeling different scenarios and realized that the licensing revenue alone could eventually dwarf the direct mining profits. We weren't just sitting on a valuable lithium deposit, we were sitting on a technology that could revolutionize a global industry. The timing couldn't have been better. Environmental pressure on traditional lithium mining was intensifying, and major auto manufacturers were demanding ethically sourced materials for their electric vehicle programs. Tesla had recently canceled contracts with 2 South American lithium producers due to environmental concerns, and other companies were following suit. I decided it was time to make our first major commercial announcement. Working with a public relations firm in Denver, we organized a press conference at the ranch to demonstrate our technology and announce the formation of Green Lithium Technologies, the company that would commercialize our sustainable extraction process. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Environmental groups praised our commitment to sustainable mining. Industry publications called our technology game-changing. And most importantly, my phone started ringing with calls from some of the biggest companies in the world. The first call came from Janet Morrison, the head of supply chain sustainability at Ford Motor Company. "Ms. Harrison, we've been following your work with great interest. Ford is committed to sourcing all battery materials from environmentally responsible suppliers. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership." Within a week, I had similar calls from General Motors, BMW, and 3 major battery manufacturers. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They were desperate for sustainable lithium sources, they were impressed by our technology, and they wanted to know how quickly we could scale up production. But the call that really caught my attention came from David Kim, the CEO of Pacific Battery Systems, one of the largest lithium-ion battery manufacturers in the world. "Rebecca, I'm flying to Denver next week. I want to see your operation in person, and I want to discuss a supply agreement that could change both of our companies forever." David's visit was unlike anything I'd experienced in the business world. He arrived in a private jet with a team of technical experts and spent 2 days at the ranch, examining every aspect of our operation. He watched our extraction process in action, reviewed our environmental impact data, and interrogated our scientists about the scalability of the technology. "This is exactly what the industry needs," he told me on his final day. "I'm prepared to offer you a 10-year supply contract for 5,000 tons of lithium carbonate annually, with a minimum price guarantee of $18,000 per ton. That's a $90 million annual contract, with built-in price escalators." The offer was staggering, but David wasn't finished. I also want to discuss licensing your extraction technology for our other supply sources. We have partnerships with lithium producers in Argentina, Chile, and Australia. If we could convert those operations to your sustainable process, we could market our batteries as completely environmentally responsible. The licensing deal he proposed would pay us a royalty of $500 per ton for every ton of lithium extracted using our technology, regardless of where it was produced. If we could help convert even a fraction of global lithium production to sustainable methods, the royalty payments alone would generate hundreds of millions in annual revenue. I asked for a week to consider the offers, but I already knew what my answer would be. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward, the chance to prove that environmental responsibility and business success weren't mutually exclusive. However, before I could finalize any agreements, I received an unexpected call that reminded me just how much my life had changed. It was Jessica, and for the first time in years, she sounded genuinely interested in what I was doing. "Rebecca, I've been reading about your lithium company in the business journals," she said. "I had no idea you were working on something so significant. Marcus and we've been talking, and we think we might have misjudged what you were trying to accomplish." Her tone was different from our previous conversations. There was respect there, and something that might have been admiration. "The hospitality industry is facing some challenges right now," she continued. "Travel patterns are changing, and environmental concerns are affecting how people choose hotels. We're wondering if there might be opportunities to collaborate." I was surprised by the overture, but I was also wary. Jessica and Marcus had spent years dismissing my environmental interests as impractical idealism. Now that those same interests were generating serious money, they were suddenly interested in collaboration. "What kind of collaboration are you thinking about?" I asked. "Well, Harrison Hotels has always been about luxury and innovation. If we could partner with green lithium to power our properties with sustainable energy systems, it would be a powerful marketing message. We could be the first major hotel chain to achieve complete carbon neutrality." The idea had merit, but I could hear the underlying assumption in her voice, that I would be the junior partner in any collaboration, providing the environmental expertise while they handled the real business decisions. "I'll think about it," I said diplomatically, "but right now I'm focused on building green lithium into a global company. If Harrison Hotels wants to work with us, they'll need to get in line with everyone else." There was a pause. "Of course, I just thought, since we're family." "Jessica, 3 years ago you and Marcus barely acknowledged my existence. Now that I'm building something valuable, suddenly family matters again?" "Rebecca, that's not fair. You were just protecting the family business model that didn't have room for different ideas. I understand that. But I'm not the same person who left Phoenix with nothing but a graduate degree and a dream. I'm building something that could be bigger than Harrison Hotels, and I'm doing it my way." After I hung up, I sat in the ranch house office where I'd first discovered the lithium surveys, thinking about how dramatically everything had changed. 6 months ago, I was the family failure, the black sheep who'd chosen environmental science over business success. Now I was the CEO of a company that could potentially be worth billions, and my siblings were asking me for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had always believed that success meant building something bigger, something that would last beyond their own lives. They'd built a hotel empire that would generate profits for generations. But I was building something that could actually change the world, that could help solve the climate crisis while creating unprecedented wealth. That evening, I stood on the ranch house porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains and thinking about my great-grandfather Henry. He'd come to this land with big dreams and had never given up, even when the cattle business failed. He'd spent decades searching for something valuable beneath the surface, and in a way, he'd found it. He just hadn't lived to see it. I thought about my parents, too, and wondered if they'd somehow known what this place could become. Maybe leaving me the ranch hadn't been a consolation prize after all. Maybe it had been their way of giving me the chance to prove that I could build something as impressive as they had, something that honored both their legacy and my own values. The next morning, I called David Kim and accepted his supply contract. Green Lithium Technologies was about to become a major player in the global lithium market, and I was ready to show the world what the black sheep of the Harrison family could accomplish. The transformation of Green Lithium Technologies from a mountain research facility into a global powerhouse happened faster than I could have imagined. Within 8 months of signing the Pacific Battery Systems contract, we had built our first commercial extraction facility at Sunset Mesa Ranch, and the results exceeded every projection we'd made. Our sustainable extraction process was producing 500 tons of lithium carbonate per month, with purity levels that consistently exceeded industry standards. More importantly, we were doing it with an environmental footprint so small that the Colorado Department of Natural Resources was using our operation as a model for sustainable mining practices. But the real game-changer came when Dr. Chen's team made another breakthrough. They discovered that our membrane technology could be adapted to extract lithium from previously unusable sources, old mining tailings, industrial wastewater, and even seawater. Suddenly, we weren't just limited to traditional lithium deposits. We could turn waste products into valuable resources. Rebecca, this changes everything, Dr. Chen explained during a team meeting in our new Denver headquarters. There are millions of tons of lithium locked up in waste materials around the world. If we can extract it economically, we're not just mining lithium, we're solving environmental problems while creating value. The implications were staggering. Mining companies that had been struggling with expensive waste disposal suddenly had a way to turn their liabilities into assets. Coastal regions dealing with saltwater intrusion could generate revenue while protecting their freshwater supplies. The technology that had started as a way to mine one ranch sustainably was becoming a global solution to multiple environmental challenges. Our success was attracting attention from unexpected quarters. The United Nations Environment Program invited me to speak at their annual conference about sustainable resource extraction. The World Economic Forum named green lithium one of their technology pioneers for 2024. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source: my own industry. The Colorado Mining Association, an organization that had historically been skeptical of environmental regulations, presented green lithium with their Innovation Award. Standing at the podium in front of 500 mining executives, I felt the weight of what we'd accomplished. 5 years ago, many of you would have dismissed sustainable mining as an oxymoron, I told the audience. Today, we're proving that environmental responsibility isn't the enemy of profitability. It's the key to long-term success. The companies that adapt to these new realities will thrive. Those that don't will become obsolete. The speech generated significant media coverage, but more importantly, it opened doors to partnerships I hadn't expected. Within a week, I had calls from mining companies in Chile, Australia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, all wanting to license our technology for their operations. The international expansion required a completely different level of business sophistication. I needed legal teams familiar with mining laws in multiple countries, environmental experts who understood local regulations, and engineering teams capable of adapting our technology to different geological conditions. That's when I made one of the most important decisions of my career. I hired Rachel Martinez as Green Lithium's Chief Operating Officer. Rachel had spent 15 years managing international operations for a major mining conglomerate, and she understood the complexities of global resource extraction better than anyone I'd ever met. Rebecca, you've built something extraordinary, Rachel told me during our first strategic planning session. But if you want to scale this globally, you need systems, processes, and partnerships that can handle the complexity. We're not just a mining company anymore. We're a technology company that happens to extract lithium. Rachel's insight was crucial. We restructured Green Lithium into 3 divisions: direct mining, our operations at Sunset Mesa Ranch, technology licensing, partnerships with other mining companies, and environmental remediation, using our technology to clean up contaminated sites while extracting valuable materials. The Environmental Remediation Division turned out to be particularly lucrative. The Environmental Protection Agency had identified thousands of contaminated sites across the United States that contained valuable minerals in their waste materials. Using our technology, we could clean up these sites while generating revenue from the extracted materials. Our first major remediation project was at an abandoned copper mine in Arizona that had been leaching toxic metals into groundwater for decades. Using our membrane technology, we extracted not just lithium but also copper, cobalt, and rare earth elements, all while neutralizing the contamination that had plagued the area for 30 years. The project was so successful that state environmental agencies began requiring mining companies to use our technology for site remediation. What had started as an environmental solution was becoming a regulatory requirement, ensuring a steady stream of revenue for years to come. By this point, Green Lithium's valuation had reached $2.8 billion, making it one of the most valuable private companies in Colorado. The financial media was calling me the accidental billionaire and the environmental mining mogul. Forbes put me on their cover with the headline, "The Green Rush: How One Woman Turned Waste into Wealth." But success brought new challenges, particularly from an unexpected source, my own family's business empire. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February. Marcus's voice was tense, almost desperate, when he reached me at the Denver office. "Rebecca, we need to talk. There's been a development with Harrison Hotels that affects all of us." "What kind of development?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was heading. "The hospitality industry is facing some serious headwinds. Travel patterns have changed permanently since the pandemic, and environmental concerns are affecting how people choose accommodations. Our occupancy rates are down 30% year over year, and we're struggling to refinance our debt." I wasn't surprised. The luxury hospitality market had been hit hard by changing consumer preferences, and Harrison Hotels' focus on opulent, resource-intensive properties was increasingly out of step with travelers who prioritize sustainability and social responsibility. "I'm sorry to hear that, Marcus, but I'm not sure why you're calling me about it. Because we need your help. Green Lithium's success has made you one of the most prominent business leaders in the region. If we could announce a partnership, maybe have you join the Harrison Hotels Board of Directors, it would signal to investors that we're serious about environmental responsibility." The irony was almost too much to bear. The same family that had dismissed me as impractical and naive was now asking me to save their business, using the very environmental expertise they'd once mocked. "Marcus, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want me to use my reputation and success to help Harrison Hotels appear more environmentally responsible?" "It's not about appearing responsible. It's about actually becoming responsible. We could retrofit all our properties with sustainable energy systems, implement water conservation programs, maybe even power some facilities with your lithium batteries." The proposal had merit from a business perspective, but I could hear the underlying assumption in Marcus's voice, that I would be grateful for the opportunity to finally be included in the family business, that I would set aside years of dismissal and rejection to help save their empire. "I'll think about it," I said carefully, "but you should know that Green Lithium's success hasn't made me desperate to prove myself to the family. I'm building something that could be much bigger than Harrison Hotels." There was a long pause. "Rebecca, I know we haven't always supported your choices, but we're family. Doesn't that count for something?" "Family counted when I was struggling to build my consulting practice and none of you returned my calls. Family counted when I was working 18-hour days to prove our technology, and you were telling people I was wasting my life. Now that I'm successful, family matters again?" "That's not fair." "It's completely fair, Marcus. You had years to treat me like family. You chose not to. Now I'm choosing to focus on the people who believed in me when it mattered." After I hung up, I sat in my office overlooking the Denver skyline, thinking about how dramatically the power dynamics had shifted. 3 years ago, I would have been grateful for any acknowledgement from my family. Now I was in a position to help them, or not, entirely on my own terms. The decision became easier when I learned more about Harrison Hotels' financial situation. They weren't just facing temporary challenges, they were facing potential bankruptcy. Years of over-leveraging and poor strategic decisions had left them vulnerable when the market shifted. A partnership with Green Lithium might provide temporary relief, but it wouldn't solve their fundamental problems. More importantly, I realized that I didn't want to be defined by my family's legacy anymore. I had built something extraordinary, something that was making a real difference in the world. Why would I dilute that achievement by trying to rescue a business model that was fundamentally at odds with my values? Instead, I made a different decision. I called a press conference to announce Green Lithium's next major initiative, a $500 million fund to support sustainable tourism development in rural communities. The fund would provide grants and technical assistance to help small communities develop ecotourism industries that could compete with traditional resort destinations. The future of travel isn't about luxury consumption, I told the assembled reporters. It's about authentic experiences that connect people with nature while supporting local communities. We're going to help create that future. The announcement generated significant media attention, but more importantly, it positioned Green Lithium as a leader in sustainable development beyond just mining. We weren't just extracting resources. We were helping communities build sustainable economies that could thrive for generations. The day after the press conference, I received a text message from Jessica. Saw your announcement. Impressive vision. Maybe we have more in common than I thought. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of a different kind of relationship with my family. Not one based on their approval or acceptance, but one based on mutual respect between equals. Standing in my office that evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains where it all began, I realized that I had finally achieved something more valuable than wealth or recognition. I had become the person I was meant to be. The black sheep who had never fit into the family mold had created her own path to success, and in doing so, had opened up possibilities that none of us had imagined. The girl who had been dismissed as impractical and naive had built a global empire, and this was just the beginning. The news broke on a Wednesday morning in March, and it changed everything. I was in my Denver office reviewing proposals for new international partnerships, when my assistant, Sarah, knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before. "Rebecca, you need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. "It's about Harrison Hotels." The headline in the Denver Business Journal made my stomach drop. Harrison Hotels, files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, family empire collapses after failed restructuring attempt. I read the article twice, trying to process what I was seeing. The company my parents had built from nothing, the empire that had defined my family's identity for decades, was essentially gone. Years of declining revenues, mounting debt, and poor strategic decisions had finally caught up with them. But what really caught my attention was buried in the third paragraph. Sources close to the company indicate that Harrison Hotels had been in preliminary discussions with Green Lithium Technologies about a potential partnership, but those talks apparently fell through when Green Lithium's CEO, Rebecca Harrison, declined to provide financial backing for the struggling hotel chain. The implication was clear. I could have saved the family business, but I had chosen not to. The article painted me as the cold, calculating sister who had abandoned her family in their hour of need. My phone started ringing immediately. The first call was from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, wanting to know if I had any comment about the bankruptcy filing. The second was from Marcus, and his voice was filled with an anger I'd never heard before. "Rebecca, what have you done?" he said without preamble. "The story is already spreading that you refuse to help us. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family's reputation?" "Marcus, I never refused to help. I said I'd think about a partnership, but..." "You said you'd think about it, and then you announced a $500 million tourism fund instead. What was I supposed to think? What was anyone supposed to think?" The unfairness of his accusation hit me like a physical blow. You were supposed to think that I was building my own company and making my own decisions. I don't owe Harrison Hotels anything, Marcus. I built Green Lithium from nothing, with no help from any of you. We're family, Rebecca. Family helps family. Where was that family loyalty when I was struggling to build my consulting practice? Where was it when I was working 18-hour days to prove my technology? You didn't want family then. You wanted me to abandon everything I cared about and become someone I wasn't. The conversation ended badly, with Marcus hanging up after accusing me of being vindictive and petty, but it was the call from Jessica that really shook me. "Rebecca, I know you're angry with us," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I know we didn't support you the way we should have, but there are 3,000 people who are going to lose their jobs because of this bankruptcy. Doesn't that matter to you?" The question hit harder than Marcus's anger. Of course it mattered to me. I'd never wanted to see anyone lose their job or watch the company my parents had built collapse. But the suggestion that I was somehow responsible for their financial mismanagement was infuriating. "Jessica, Harrison Hotels was in trouble long before I became successful. Your problems aren't about me refusing to help. They're about years of poor decisions and resistance to change. I offered to discuss partnership possibilities, but you needed me to be your savior, not your partner. So you're just going to let it all collapse? Everything Mom and Dad built? I'm going to let the business they built succeed or fail on its own merits, just like I did with Green Lithium. That's what they would have wanted, for all of us to succeed or fail based on our own efforts. But Jessica's words stayed with me. That night, I found myself driving to Sunset Mesa Ranch, needing the clarity that only the mountains could provide. The facility was quiet, with just the night shift monitoring the extraction equipment. I walked to the spot where I'd first discovered my great-grandfather's lithium surveys, trying to understand what I was feeling. The truth was, I did feel responsible in some way. Not for Harrison Hotel's financial problems, but for the fact that my success had somehow become part of their failure narrative. The media coverage was already portraying me as the heartless sister who had chosen money over family, and I knew that narrative would follow me for years. But more than that, I was struggling with a fundamental question. What did I owe to the people who had shaped me, even if they had also hurt me? My parents had given me opportunities, education, and a foundation that had made my success possible. They had also consistently undervalued my contributions and dismissed my passions. How was I supposed to balance those competing realities? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chen found me sitting on the ranch house porch the next morning, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "Rebecca, I heard about the Harrison Hotel's situation," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "I wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," I said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I'm not fine. I feel like I'm being blamed for something that isn't my fault, but I also feel guilty about not doing more to help." Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. "You know, when I was developing the membrane technology, I had to make a choice. I could license it to traditional mining companies who would use it to extract more resources faster, or I could work with people like you who wanted to use it responsibly. The traditional companies offered more money, but I chose you because I believed in what you were trying to accomplish. What's your point?" "My point is that sometimes doing the right thing means disappointing people who expect you to make different choices. You built Green Lithium to prove that business success and environmental responsibility could coexist. If you had used your company's resources to bail out a business model that contradicted those values, what would that have said about everything we've accomplished?" His words helped clarify something I'd been struggling with. My refusal to save Harrison Hotels wasn't about family loyalty or lack of compassion. It was about maintaining the integrity of what I'd built. Green Lithium represented a different way of doing business, one that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profits. Using it to rescue a company that embodied the opposite philosophy would have undermined everything we stood for. But I also realized that I couldn't just ignore the situation. The media narrative was damaging not just to me personally, but to Green Lithium's reputation. If potential partners and investors saw me as someone who abandoned family in crisis, it could affect their willingness to work with us. I decided to take control of the narrative. I called a press conference for the following week, not to defend my decision, but to explain what Green Lithium was really about, and why our approach to business was different. "I want to address the speculation about my family's hotel business," I told the assembled reporters. "Harrison Hotel's financial difficulties are the result of industry-wide challenges and strategic decisions made long before Green Lithium existed. The suggestion that I somehow caused or could have prevented their bankruptcy is simply untrue." I paused, looking directly into the cameras. "But I want to talk about something more important than family drama. Green Lithium was built on the principle that business success should create value for society, not just shareholders. Every decision we make is evaluated through that lens. We choose partners who share our values, we invest in projects that benefit communities, and we measure success by our positive impact on the world." The questions from reporters were predictably focused on the family conflict, but I kept steering the conversation back to Green Lithium's mission and achievements. I talked about the thousands of jobs we'd created, the environmental problems we'd solved, and the communities we'd helped develop sustainable economies. "The choice isn't between family loyalty and business success," I concluded. "It's between maintaining the status quo and creating something better. I choose to create something better." The press conference generated significant coverage, but more importantly, it seemed to shift the narrative. Instead of focusing on family conflict, reporters began writing about Green Lithium's innovative approach to business and our growing impact on global sustainability efforts. The real vindication came 2 weeks later when Marcus called me again. This time his voice was different, subdued, almost apologetic. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology," he said. "I've been going through the Harrison Hotel's financials with our bankruptcy attorney, and I'm realizing just how bad our situation really was. Even if you had invested everything Green Lithium was worth, it wouldn't have saved us. We were too far gone. Marcus, I never wanted to see the company fail. I just couldn't sacrifice everything I'd built to delay the inevitable. I know, I understand that now. I also understand something else. You were right about the direction of the industry. The hotels that are surviving are the ones that prioritize sustainability and authentic experiences. We were so focused on luxury and exclusivity that we missed the fundamental shift in what people actually want." There was a long pause. "Rebecca, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I'm proud that you had the courage to build something that mattered, even when we didn't support you. You've become everything Mom and Dad hoped we'd become: successful, innovative, and committed to making a positive impact." His words meant more to me than any business achievement ever could. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my family finally understood who I was and what I was trying to accomplish. "Thank you, Marcus. That means everything to me." "There's something else," he continued. "Jessica and I have been talking about what's next for us. We're thinking about starting a sustainable hospitality consulting firm, helping hotels transition to more environmentally responsible operations. We'd love to learn from what you've accomplished with Green Lithium." The irony wasn't lost on me. My siblings, who had once dismissed my environmental interests as impractical idealism, were now asking to learn from my success. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt hopeful. Maybe the family conflict that had defined so much of my life was finally transforming into something more positive. "I'd be happy to share what I've learned," I said. "But you should know that building something sustainable is much harder than building something profitable. It requires different thinking, different partnerships, and different measures of success." "We're ready to learn," Marcus said. "We're ready to do things differently." As I hung up the phone, I realized that this conversation represented something I'd been seeking for years. Not just my family's acceptance, but their respect for the path I'd chosen. The black sheep who had never fit into their world had ultimately changed their world, showing them that success could be measured by more than just financial returns. The girl who had been dismissed as impractical and naive had built something that was reshaping entire industries. And now, finally, even her family was beginning to understand what she had accomplished. 2 years after the Harrison Hotel's bankruptcy, I stood in the ballroom of the Denver Convention Center, surrounded by 800 of the world's most influential business leaders, environmental scientists, and government officials. The occasion was the Global Sustainability Summit, and I was receiving the International Environmental Leadership Award for Green Lithium's revolutionary impact on sustainable resource extraction. But this wasn't just another corporate award ceremony. Tonight represented something much more significant: the complete vindication of every choice I'd made, every risk I'd taken, and every moment I'd been dismissed as the family disappointment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the presenter announced, "this year's recipient has fundamentally changed how we think about the relationship between business success and environmental responsibility. Under her leadership, Green Lithium Technologies has not only become one of the world's most valuable mining companies, but has also pioneered extraction methods that are being adopted globally to reduce the environmental impact of resource development." As I walked to the podium, I caught sight of Marcus and Jessica in the audience. They had flown in from San Francisco, where their sustainable hospitality consulting firm was now working with some of the world's most prestigious hotel chains to implement environmentally responsible practices. The irony wasn't lost on me. The siblings who had once mocked my environmental interests were now building their own careers around the same principles they'd dismissed as impractical. 5 years ago, I inherited what my family considered a worthless piece of land, I began, my voice carrying easily through the vast ballroom. A failed cattle ranch in the Colorado mountains that had been nothing but a financial burden for generations. Today, that ranch is the headquarters of a company that has extracted over 50,000 tons of lithium using completely sustainable methods, has licensed our technology to operations on 6 continents, and has helped remediate over 200 contaminated sites while generating $15 billion in revenue. The audience applauded, but I wasn't finished. More importantly, we've proven that the choice between profitability and environmental responsibility is a false one. When we align our business models with natural systems instead of fighting against them, we don't just reduce harm, we create unprecedented value. The numbers spoke for themselves. Green Lithium had grown from a single ranch operation to a global enterprise with facilities in 12 countries. Our technology licensing division was generating over $2 billion annually in royalty payments. The environmental remediation division had cleaned up toxic sites while extracting valuable materials worth over $8 billion. And our direct mining operations were producing lithium at costs so low that we were essentially printing money. But the real validation came from the industry transformation we'd catalyzed. Traditional mining companies that had initially dismissed our methods as too expensive or too complicated were now desperately trying to license our technology as environmental regulations tightened worldwide. The European Union had passed legislation requiring all lithium imports to meet sustainability standards that only our extraction methods could achieve. China, the world's largest lithium consumer, had announced plans to retrofit their entire domestic mining industry with membrane-based extraction systems. The old model of resource extraction was built on the assumption that environmental destruction was the inevitable cost of economic development, I continued. We've proven that assumption wrong. When we work with natural systems instead of against them, we can create more wealth, more jobs, and more prosperity than ever before, while actually improving the environment. The speech was well received, but the real moment of triumph came during the reception afterward. I was standing near the bar, discussing potential partnerships with executives from several major corporations, when I noticed a familiar figure approaching through the crowd. It was David Harrison, no relation to my family, but the CEO of Harrison Industries, one of the largest mining conglomerates in the world. His company had been one of the most vocal critics of sustainable mining practices, arguing that environmental regulations were destroying American competitiveness. "Miss Harrison," he said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Congratulations on your award. Quite an accomplishment." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I appreciate you coming tonight. Actually, I was hoping we could discuss a potential partnership. Harrison Industries is looking to modernize our extraction operations, and we're interested in licensing your membrane technology for our lithium facilities in Nevada and Utah." The request was particularly satisfying because Harrison Industries had been one of the companies that had initially tried to poach our key scientists with offers of double salaries and stock options. When that failed, they'd attempted to develop competing technology, spending over $500 million on research and development before finally admitting defeat. "I'm flattered by your interest," I replied diplomatically, "but as I'm sure you understand, we're very selective about our licensing partnerships. We only work with companies that share our commitment to environmental stewardship and community development." David Harrison's expression tightened slightly. "Ms. Harrison, I think you'll find that our commitment to sustainability has evolved significantly in recent years. We're prepared to make substantial investments in environmental compliance and community programs." "I'm glad to hear that your company is recognizing the importance of sustainable practices," I said. "I'll have my licensing team send you our partnership requirements. If Harrison Industries is willing to meet our standards, we'd be happy to discuss a potential arrangement." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but the power dynamic was unmistakable. The CEO of a company worth $50 billion was essentially asking for my permission to use technology that had been developed on a ranch his industry had once considered worthless. Later that evening, I found myself in my hotel suite, looking out at the Denver skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The city lights stretched out below me, and I could see the mountains in the distance where it all began. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Chen. "Watched your speech online. Your great-grandfather would be proud." You didn't just find what he was looking for, you found something much more valuable. He was right. My great-grandfather had spent decades searching for valuable minerals beneath Sunset Mesa Ranch, but what I'd found was something even more precious. A way to create wealth that aligned with my values. A business model that proved environmental responsibility and financial success could coexist. The next morning brought news that would have been unimaginable when I first inherited the ranch. The Wall Street Journal reported that Green Lithium Technologies had been valued at $28 billion in our latest funding round, making it one of the most valuable private companies in the world. More importantly, we had announced plans to go public within the next year, with an expected IPO valuation of over $40 billion. The announcement triggered a media frenzy, but it also brought a phone call I'd been expecting. It was from Angela Morrison, the head of mergers and acquisitions at Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's investment company. "Rebecca, I'll get straight to the point," she said. "Mr. Buffett has been following Green Lithium's progress with great interest. He believes your company represents the future of sustainable business, and he'd like to discuss a potential investment or acquisition." The offer was staggering: $45 billion in cash for 100% of Green Lithium, with guarantees that the company would continue to operate independently and that all employees would retain their positions. It was more money than I could have imagined when I first discovered those geological surveys in my great-grandfather's office. "I appreciate Mr. Buffett's interest," I said carefully, "but Green Lithium isn't for sale. We're building something that's about more than just financial returns. We're proving that business can be a force for positive change in the world." "I understand your position," Angela replied, "but please consider the impact you could have with Berkshire's resources behind you. You could scale your technology globally, accelerate the transition to sustainable mining practices, and generate returns that would benefit millions of shareholders." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but my position remained unchanged. I had built Green Lithium to prove a point, not to make a quick profit. Selling to Berkshire Hathaway would provide a massive financial windfall, but it would also mean losing control of the company's mission and values. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with Green Lithium's board of directors to discuss the acquisition offer. The boardroom was filled with some of the most successful business leaders in the country, people who had built their careers on identifying and capitalizing on opportunities for maximum financial return. "Rebecca, this is an incredible offer," said Patricia Williams, who had been with us since the beginning. "A $45 billion valuation represents a return of over 1,000% on our original investment. Your personal stake would be worth over $20 billion. "I understand the financial implications," I replied, "but I want to ask all of you a question. Why did you initially invest in Green Lithium? Was it just about the money, or was it about being part of something that could change the world?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Chen spoke up. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about this since you told me about the offer. When I first developed the membrane technology, I could have licensed it to any number of companies for immediate profit. But I chose to work with you because I believed in your vision of sustainable development. If we sell to Berkshire Hathaway, we might make more money, but we'll lose the ability to ensure that our technology is used responsibly." One by one, the other board members voiced their support for rejecting the acquisition offer. These were people who had built their careers on maximizing financial returns, but they had been transformed by their involvement with Green Lithium. They had seen that business success could be measured by more than just stock prices and quarterly earnings. "The motion to reject the Berkshire Hathaway acquisition offer is approved unanimously," I announced. "Green Lithium will remain independent, and will continue to pursue our mission of proving that environmental responsibility and business success are not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing." The decision to reject the acquisition offer generated significant media attention, but it also solidified Green Lithium's position as a company that was truly committed to its values. Within a week, we had received inquiries from institutional investors who wanted to participate in our IPO, specifically because they believed in our mission. That evening, I drove back to Sunset Mesa Ranch, wanting to process the day's events in the place where it all began. The facility was running smoothly, with the night shift monitoring the extraction equipment that had transformed a failed cattle ranch into the foundation of a global empire. I walked to the old ranch house, now preserved as a company museum, and sat on the front porch where I had first discovered my great-grandfather's geological surveys. The mountains looked the same as they had 5 years ago, but everything else had changed completely. My phone rang, and I saw that it was Jessica calling. "Rebecca, I just heard about the Berkshire Hathaway offer," she said. "I can't believe you turned down $45 billion. That's more money than our entire family could spend in 10 lifetimes. "It's not about the money, Jessica. It's about building something that matters, something that will still be making a positive impact long after I'm gone." There was a pause. I'm starting to understand what you mean. Marcus and I have been working with hotels that are implementing sustainable practices, And we're seeing how much more engaged their employees are, how much more loyal their customers are. It's not just about reducing costs. It's about creating meaning. That's exactly right. When you align your business with your values, when you build something that makes the world better, success becomes about more than just money. It becomes about legacy. As I ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the wind move through the pine trees, I realized that I had achieved something I'd never consciously pursued. I had become the kind of person my parents had always hoped I'd become, just not in the way they had expected. They had built a hotel empire through vision, determination, and strategic thinking. I had built a global technology company using those same qualities, but applied to challenges they had never imagined. The black sheep who had never fit into their mold had ultimately exceeded their wildest dreams of success. But more than that, I had proven that success didn't require abandoning your principles. It required staying true to them, even when everyone else thought you were making a mistake. The girl who had been dismissed as impractical and naive had built something that was reshaping entire industries. And she had done it her way on her terms, with respect for the land and a commitment to making the world a better place. The black sheep had become the shepherd, leading an entire industry toward a more sustainable future. 5 years after rejecting the Berkshire Hathaway acquisition offer, I stood in the same spot where my great-grandfather had first dreamed of finding something valuable beneath Sunset Mesa Ranch. But this time, I wasn't alone. Surrounding me were 50 young environmental scientists, engineers, and business students from universities around the world, all participants in the Harrison Fellowship Program, a scholarship initiative I'd established to support the next generation of sustainable business leaders. This is where it all began, I told the group, gesturing toward the weathered ranch house that now served as both a museum and a research center. My great-grandfather bought this land in 1934 with nothing but hope and determination. He spent decades looking for something valuable, and in a way, he found it. He just didn't live to see it. The ranch looked completely different now. The original buildings had been carefully restored and integrated with state-of-the-art research facilities. Solar panels provided all the electricity. Geothermal systems handled heating and cooling, and the extraction operations were so clean that the surrounding ecosystem had actually improved since we'd begun mining. Wildlife had returned to areas that had been barren for decades, and the creek ran clearer than it had in living memory. The lesson here isn't just about finding lithium, I continued. It's about persistence, about believing in something even when everyone else thinks you're wrong, and about staying true to your values even when it would be easier to compromise. One of the students, a young woman from Kenya named Amara, raised her hand. Miss Harrison, what would you say to someone who's facing pressure to abandon their principles for financial gain? The question took me back to my own journey, to all the moments when I'd been tempted to take the easier path. I'd tell them that the most successful businesses are built on authentic purpose, not just profit. When you align your work with your values, you create something that can't be replicated or replaced. Anyone can extract lithium from the ground, but only we can do it in a way that actually improves the environment. After the fellowship program concluded, I walked through the facility, checking on the various research projects that had grown out of our original lithium extraction technology. Dr. Chen's team was working on applications for rare earth element recovery. Dr. Rodriguez had developed methods for extracting gold and silver from electronic waste, and a new team was exploring ways to use our membrane technology for water purification in developing countries. Each project represented a new opportunity to prove that business success and environmental responsibility could be mutually reinforcing. We weren't just a mining company anymore. We were a technology platform for solving resource challenges around the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news about the Antarctica partnership. Incredible work, Dad would be so proud. The Antarctic project he was referring to was our latest breakthrough. The international scientific community had asked Green Lithium to develop extraction methods for recovering valuable minerals from Antarctic ice cores without disturbing the pristine environment. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. But our team had developed a system that could extract rare isotopes from ice samples with zero environmental impact. The project had attracted attention from NASA, which was interested in using similar technology for resource extraction on Mars. The idea that methods developed on a Colorado ranch could eventually be used for space exploration was almost too fantastic to believe, but it represented the logical evolution of everything we'd built. That evening, I drove to Denver for the quarterly board meeting, where we would be discussing the final preparations for Green Lithium's long-awaited IPO. The company had grown to over 15,000 employees worldwide, with operations on every continent except Antarctica. Our technology licensing agreements generated over $8 billion annually, and our direct mining operations were producing lithium at costs so low that we were essentially setting global market prices. The IPO roadshow begins next week, announced our CFO, David Park. Based on preliminary investor interest, we're looking at a valuation between $75 and $85 billion. That would make it one of the largest IPOs in history. The numbers were staggering, but they also represented validation of everything we'd worked to achieve. We weren't just going public to make money. We were going public to demonstrate that sustainable business practices could generate extraordinary returns for investors while creating positive impact for society. I want to make sure everyone understands what this IPO represents, I told the board. We're not just selling shares in a mining company. We're selling shares in a vision of how business can be done differently. Every investor who buys our stock is betting that environmental responsibility and financial success are not just compatible, but inseparable. The IPO launched on a Monday morning in November, and the response exceeded our most optimistic projections. The stock opened at $85 per share and closed the first day at $127, giving Green Lithium a market capitalization of over $100 billion. But more importantly, the investor base included pension funds, university endowments, and individual investors who specifically wanted to support sustainable business practices. This is about more than just making money, I told CNBC during a live interview from the New York Stock Exchange. This is about proving that the next generation of successful companies will be built on principles of environmental stewardship and social responsibility. We're showing that you can create tremendous wealth while also creating tremendous value for society. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, but the moment that meant the most to me came in a phone call from Jessica later that day. "Rebecca, I watched your interview this morning," she said. "I kept thinking about what Mom and Dad would say if they could see you now. They always believed that business was about building something bigger than yourself, something that would last beyond your own lifetime. You've done exactly that." Her words brought tears to my eyes. For so many years I'd struggled with the feeling that my parents had never understood or appreciated what I was trying to accomplish. But Jessica was right. They had always emphasized the importance of building something meaningful, something that would create lasting value. I had done exactly that, just not in the way they had expected. "Thank you, Jessica. That means more to me than you know." "There's something else," she continued. "Marcus and I have been talking about expanding our consulting firm. We want to help other family businesses transition to sustainable practices. We've learned so much from watching your journey, and we want to share those lessons with other families who might be struggling with similar challenges." The conversation continued for another hour, and I realized that our family dynamic had completely transformed. We were no longer the hotel heirs and the environmental idealist. We were three siblings who had each found ways to create meaningful businesses that aligned with our values. A week after the IPO, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. The Colorado Mining Association wanted to present me with their Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing my contributions to transforming the mining industry. The same organization that had once been skeptical of environmental regulations was now celebrating the success of sustainable extraction methods. Standing at the podium in the same convention center where I'd first spoken about sustainable mining 5 years earlier, I looked out at an audience that included many of the same executives who had initially dismissed our technology as impractical. When I first addressed this organization, many of you were skeptical about whether environmental responsibility and mining profitability could coexist, I began. Today, sustainable extraction methods are being implemented at mining operations around the world. Traditional mining companies are retrofitting their facilities with membrane technology. Environmental groups are partnering with mining companies to develop responsible extraction methods. And investors are specifically seeking opportunities to fund sustainable resource development. I paused, looking directly at several executives who had once been vocal critics of our approach. The transformation of this industry proves something fundamental about business success. Companies that align their operations with natural systems don't just reduce harm. They create competitive advantages that can't be replicated by companies that continue to treat the environment as an obstacle to overcome. The speech was well received, but the real validation came during the reception afterward. David Harrison, the mining executive who had once dismissed sustainable practices as too expensive, approached me with a different message. "Ms. Harrison, I owe you an apology," he said. 5 years ago, I thought your company was pursuing a strategy that would never be commercially viable. Today, Harrison Industries is implementing your technology at all our domestic operations, and our profitability has improved dramatically. You didn't just prove that sustainable mining was possible, you proved that it was superior. Similar conversations continued throughout the evening, with executives from companies around the world sharing stories of how green lithium's technology had transformed their operations. The vindication was complete. The black sheep who had been dismissed as impractical had fundamentally changed how an entire industry operated. As I drove back to Sunset Mesa Ranch that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The ranch where it all began was now the headquarters of a global empire, but it was also something more important. It was proof that success could be achieved without compromising your principles. My phone rang, and I saw that it was Dr. Chen calling from our research facility in Singapore. "Rebecca, I wanted to share some exciting news," he said. "The water purification project in Bangladesh is showing incredible results. We're providing clean drinking water to over 100,000 people while generating enough revenue to fund expansion to other regions. The technology that started with lithium extraction is now solving completely different problems." His words captured something essential about what we'd built. Green Lithium wasn't just a mining company. It was a platform for developing solutions to resource challenges around the world. The principles we'd established at a remote ranch in Colorado were now being applied to problems in dozens of countries. "That's exactly what I hoped would happen," I replied. "We didn't just want to extract lithium more sustainably. We wanted to prove that business could be a force for solving global challenges." Later that evening, I walked to the spot where I had first discovered my great-grandfather's geological surveys. The mountains looked the same as they had 10 years ago, but everything else had changed completely. The failed cattle ranch had become the foundation of a global technology company. The worthless inheritance had become a platform for revolutionary change. But more than that, I had proven something to myself and to the world, that success didn't require abandoning your principles. It required staying true to them, even when everyone else thought you were making a mistake. The black sheep, who had never fit into her family's mold, had ultimately exceeded their wildest dreams of success. But she had done it her way, on her terms, with respect for the land and a commitment to making the world a better place. Standing there in the darkness, listening to the wind move through the pine trees, I realized that my great-grandfather's dream had finally come true. He had spent decades looking for something valuable beneath this land, and I had found it. Not just lithium, but something much more precious. Proof that business success and environmental responsibility were not just compatible, but inseparable. The girl who had been dismissed as impractical and naive had built something that was reshaping entire industries. And the legacy would continue, inspiring future generations to believe that they could build businesses that were both profitable and purposeful. The black sheep had become the shepherd, leading an entire industry toward a more sustainable future, and this was just the beginning. 10 years after I first set foot on Sunset Mesa Ranch, I found myself standing in the United Nations General Assembly, addressing world leaders about the future of sustainable development. The girl who had once been dismissed as the family disappointment was now being introduced as, quote, one of the most influential business leaders of our generation. Distinguished delegates, I began, looking out at representatives from 193 countries. I want to tell you about a lesson I learned from a failed cattle ranch in Colorado. Sometimes the things that seem worthless contain the greatest value. Sometimes the paths that seem impossible lead to the most important destinations. The invitation to address the UN had come after green lithium's technology had been successfully implemented in 47 countries, helping to reduce global lithium extraction environmental damage by 78%, while simultaneously increasing production efficiency. But more than that, our water purification systems were now providing clean drinking water to over 10 million people across 3 continents. The challenge facing our world today isn't a lack of resources, I continued. It's a lack of imagination about how to use those resources responsibly. We've been trapped by false choices: growth or sustainability, profits or principles, success or values. But these are false choices. The most successful businesses of the future will be those that recognize that environmental responsibility and economic prosperity are not opposing forces. They are complementary ones. In the audience, I spotted Dr. Chen, now serving as Green Lithium's Chief Technology Officer and a UN Special Advisor on Sustainable Mining. Beside him sat Dr. Rodriguez, who had been appointed to lead the International Geological Survey's new Sustainable Extraction Division. These were the people who had believed in my vision when it seemed impossible, who had helped transform a crazy idea into a global movement. After the speech, I was approached by Maria Santos, a young entrepreneur from Brazil who had developed sustainable cocoa farming techniques. "Ms. Harrison," she said, "your story has inspired me to stay true to my environmental principles, even when investors pressured me to use cheaper, more harmful methods. I wanted to thank you for proving that you don't have to choose between success and sustainability." Similar conversations continued throughout the day, with entrepreneurs, scientists, and government officials sharing stories of how Green Lithium's success had encouraged them to pursue their own sustainable innovations. I realized that the impact of our work extended far beyond lithium extraction. We had helped change how people thought about the relationship between business and the environment. That evening, I flew back to Colorado for a very special occasion, the 10th anniversary celebration of Green Lithium Technologies. The event was being held at Sunset Mesa Ranch, where over 500 employees, investors, partners, and family members had gathered to commemorate the journey from worthless inheritance to global empire. As I walked through the facility, I marveled at how much had changed. The original ranch buildings had been expanded into a campus that included research laboratories, manufacturing facilities, and a conference center that hosted sustainable business leaders from around the world. But we had been careful to preserve the natural beauty that had first drawn me to this place: the mountains, the creek, the wildlife that had returned in abundance. "Rebecca," I turned to see Patricia Williams approaching with a huge smile. "I can't believe it's been 10 years since that first meeting in my office. Do you remember how nervous you were when you pitched the sustainable lithium extraction concept?" "I remember you telling me I was either crazy or brilliant," I laughed. "I'm still not sure which one was right." "Both," she said. "The best entrepreneurs are always a little bit crazy. You had to be crazy to think you could revolutionize an entire industry from a remote ranch in Colorado. But you were also brilliant enough to see connections that everyone else missed." As the celebration continued, I found myself surrounded by people whose lives had been transformed by our work. There was James Rodriguez, a former coal miner from West Virginia who had retrained as a membrane technician and now managed one of our extraction facilities. Sarah Kim, an environmental science graduate who had started as an intern and was now leading our Asian operations. Carlos Martinez, a rancher from New Mexico who had licensed our technology to extract lithium from his land while continuing to raise cattle. Each story reminded me that business success isn't just about creating wealth. It's about creating opportunities for others to build meaningful lives and careers. The highlight of the evening came when Marcus and Jessica took the stage together. Their sustainable hospitality consulting firm had grown into a major force in the travel industry, helping hundreds of hotels and resorts implement environmentally responsible practices. 10 years ago, our sister was the black sheep of the Harrison family, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the crowd. We thought she was wasting her talents on environmental causes that would never amount to anything. We were wrong about everything. Jessica nodded, taking the microphone. Rebecca didn't just prove that sustainable business practices could be profitable. She proved that they were essential for long-term success. The companies that are thriving today are the ones that understand what she understood from the beginning, that environmental responsibility isn't a constraint on business success, it's the foundation of it. Their words meant more to me than any business achievement ever could. For so many years, I had struggled with feeling like an outsider in my own family. But now I realized that being different hadn't been a weakness. It had been my greatest strength. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone on the ranch house porch, the same spot where I had first discovered my great-grandfather's geological surveys. The mountains looked the same as they had a decade ago, but everything else had changed completely. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. The Mars mission just confirmed that our extraction technology will be used for the first permanent research station on the Red Planet. From a Colorado ranch to Mars. Not bad for a failed cattle operation. The Mars project represented the ultimate validation of everything we'd built. NASA had selected our membrane technology for the Artemis lunar base and the planned Mars colony because it could extract water and valuable minerals from alien soils without environmental damage. The methods we'd developed to sustainably extract lithium from Earth were now being adapted for space exploration. I thought about my parents, about the hotel empire they had built through vision, determination, and strategic thinking. They had created something that generated wealth and provided jobs for thousands of people. But I had created something that could help solve global challenges while generating even greater wealth. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they had considered the least business-minded had built the most successful business in the family's history. But more than that, I had proven that success didn't require abandoning your principles. It required staying true to them, even when everyone else thought you were making a mistake. A year later, I was back at the ranch for another milestone, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Harrison Institute for Sustainable Business, a research center and business school that would train the next generation of entrepreneurs to build companies that created both profit and positive impact. This institute represents everything we've learned about the relationship between business success and environmental responsibility, I told the assembled crowd of students, faculty, and business leaders. We're not just teaching people how to make money, we're teaching them how to make a difference. The institute would offer degrees in sustainable business practices, environmental entrepreneurship, and responsible technology development. But more importantly, it would serve as a living laboratory, where students could work on real-world challenges while learning from companies that had successfully integrated profitability with purpose. Standing there that day, watching young entrepreneurs from around the world explore the same ranch buildings where I had first discovered my great-grandfather's dreams, I realized that the story was far from over. The black sheep who had never fit into her family's mold had created a new mold entirely, one that could inspire future generations to build businesses that were both profitable and purposeful. The ultimate lesson of my journey wasn't about lithium extraction or sustainable mining. It was about the power of staying true to your values, even when the world tells you those values are impractical. It was about the courage to pursue your vision, even when your own family doesn't understand it. And it was about the recognition that the greatest success comes not from fitting into someone else's definition of achievement, but from creating your own. The girl who had been dismissed as impractical and naive had built something that was reshaping entire industries and inspiring a new generation of entrepreneurs. The black sheep had become the shepherd, leading not just her family but the entire business world toward a more sustainable future. And in the end, that turned out to be worth far more than gold. As I walked through the ranch one final time that evening, I thought about my great-grandfather Henry, who had spent decades searching for something valuable beneath this land. He had found it, in a way, not the gold or silver he had hoped for, but something much more precious, the foundation for a legacy that would inspire others to believe that business could be a force for positive change in the world. The worthless inheritance had become priceless. The failed cattle ranch had become the birthplace of a revolution. And the black sheep of the Harrison family had become exactly who she was meant to be. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places where no one thinks to look. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from the courage to dig deeper when everyone else has given up. And sometimes, the people who seem least likely to succeed are the ones who change the world. The lesson isn't just about finding lithium beneath a Colorado ranch. It's about finding the courage to pursue your vision, even when the world tells you it's impossible. It's about staying true to your values, even when compromise would be easier. And it's about remembering that the greatest success comes not from fitting into someone else's mold, but from creating your own. The black sheep had turned the family ranch into gold, but more than that, she had turned her life into something golden, a legacy of innovation, integrity, and impact that would inspire generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.